welcome back. This is From Battle to Business with your host, Dean Van Dyke. And today I am fortunate to have Robert Poole join us on the podcast. Welcome, Robert.
Oh, thank you very much. Glad to be here, Dean.
It's great to have you. And I hear we were talking pre-show, you're in sunny Scottsdale. So that's a little bit better than the weather I've got here. It's cloudy and raining. So it's great to have you. But I'd love for the audience to know a little bit more about you. And so if you could, in 60 seconds or less, tell us who Robert is.
Yeah, absolutely. I am ex-military, like a lot of people probably listening. I was an Army officer for a couple of years. And then when I got out, I got into entrepreneurship and have been doing sales and marketing entrepreneurship for 25, 28 years now. Live here in Scottsdale, Arizona with my beautiful wife and kids. And I would love to tell you all my great hobbies, but business is really my hobby. So I'm one of those guys. Yeah, that's Robert in 60 seconds, or probably less.
Nice. No, that's awesome. So, the military has a way of shaping us, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how did the military service prepare you for what you're doing now?
There's I was thinking about the other day, and the military is really so powerful in the discipline habits that it teaches.
Mhm.
And I don't mean just discipline like we traditionally think about discipline, but the way it changes us as people and allows us to grow as people. And that's something that I think is not taught in other backgrounds.
Mhm.
And so when we make that transition from the military to the civilian life, there's so many lessons that we can take with us that we're so far ahead of the average person, who may be the same age, for instance. Just little things like, and I'll give you an example. When I was at West Point, the first year, you're a plebe, and so the upper
Mhm.
class, kind of harass you, and that first summer is they make it so hard that you're only allowed to say four answers for a question. They call it your four responses. So yes sir, no sir, no excuse sir, and sir, I do not understand. And so you can ask, a cadet may ask you, what's the weather like today, cadet, and how do you answer that out of yes or no sir, no excuse sir, and sir, I do not understand. And you can't. So it would turn into no excuse sir, and that sort of thing. But the point of doing that, it was very frustrating, but the point of doing that was to get you to take accountability for everything. So why is it raining today, cadet? No excuse sir. And obviously it's completely out of our control. It's nothing to do with us, but it's a hyper way of teaching you accountability. Because
Mhm.
as we all know, in the military, of course, in that context, it's life and death sometimes when it
Right.
comes to taking accountability and taking ownership. So they use an extreme way of trying to teach that lesson, and we could take that same lesson in the civilian world when we get into like owning a business, for instance. A lot of times it's natural in society for us to you want to blame outside circumstances. Your sales are not going well. Well, it's the economy, or I can't find any good people.
Mhm.
It's the quality of our workforce, or it's the politicians in Washington, or it's whatever excuse you want to come up with. And by learning lessons like that accountability, you realize that if you take ownership of whatever problem you have, and you say, you know what, it starts with me. I've got to fix it. It's got nothing to do with anybody else. That really empowers you and gives you a leg up on other people in business who are finger pointing and trying to come up with excuses. And so that military background, I think, helps us, in a lot of ways. But that's accountability is a big one, and something that really served me from the beginning of my career. I mean, there's so many other things, but I think that's a big example I like to use a lot because I think it's had such a big impact on me, in my
Mhm.
business.
When you think about accountability and just how the military is structured, right? So we most know going in, some are going in blind. But from an accountability perspective, it is one of the things it's instilled in us that we take responsibility for our gear, for our loadout, for just everything that's within our control. And but I think it's interesting because you talk about an entrepreneur making that transition from operator to owner, but I think accountability ties right into that, right? And but from your perspective, and I know this is, a lot of your focus, but how does an entrepreneur make that transition? Because it's tough. I mean, I speak to business owners that, think they should be working 70, 80 hours a week to be successful, when in fact we know that that's not the case. But so help us understand how that transition from operator to owner, how you make it.
Yeah, absolutely. And it was one of those things that actually took me a long time to learn. As I mentioned, my current business owned it for 22 years, and I would say for about 15 of those years, I was that guy working, 60, 70 hours a week. And it took a big event in my life, my business partner passing away suddenly, and me
Oh, wow.
being suddenly in charge of a multi-million-dollar company without any kind of support, no, business partner to mentally, use as a crutch, and I forced myself to make that transition, because I realized, what, I can't do that. If I want to have any kind of life, I've got to figure out how to get this thing to run by itself. And so, but you hit on, a real important thing, Dean, at the beginning, when you said that we have to make that transition first. It's a mindset. That's the most important thing. And it's difficult because, in something like our backgrounds in the military, it's very structured, everything we do. And, there's process and everything, which is all good. But a lot of times, when we come into business, we tend to want to control things there, and we have a hard time delegating. Which is one of the biggest things. I still have problems with that, and I know a lot of business owners do, because, let's face it, we say, well, geez, I can, by the time I teach this person how to do it, I could do it myself, or nobody can do it as good as I can. Let's face it, that's what most of us end up thinking,
We do.
But, but the problem is that thinking, that's not an owner thinking, that's an operator thinking. And so the biggest and most difficult thing is really changing our mentality, and realizing that our job is not to do tasks, so to speak. Our job is to focus on the strategic level things, the things that are actually going to grow the business, focusing on, what kind of clients do we need to get? What kind of customers do we need to have? How do we acquire those customers? So it's a little bit like going from your E1, E2, you're an implementer, versus that the post commander or whatever. He's not implementing anything. He's not sitting there writing out specific things. He's got somebody doing all that, and so he's focusing on the bigger issues. And that's what it's hard for us in business, because we learn how to do it in the military, but then we kind of forget in business it's the same thing. We kind of and I think it's because, the civilian world doesn't teach that. We kind of fold into ourselves and get kind of, we forget of the lesson that we learned in the military, about what we should be focusing on. So step one is making that mental transition to discipline yourself to do the right things, to focus on that strategy, to focus working on the business, not in it, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think that's, when you think about, I'm actually going through some of that right now with some changes I'm potentially going to make here as we move quickly towards the end of the year. It's identifying, what can I offload? What should I offload? And it's one of the things where, I was on a mastermind call earlier today, and we were kind of brainstorming potential solutions. And one of my colleagues on the call was like, you need to stop doing that. I was like, well, I'm kind of a control freak. So it's like, you've got to shift that mindset. And it is all about mindset. When you think about it, how do you know that you've made that shift? Is it, I'm thinking strategically, I don't have a list of tasks that I need to do, even though there's going to be tasks you need to do, but how do you know you've made that shift successfully?
Well, I think in general that I always like to think about it in terms of, if I went to Tahiti for 3 weeks, just dropped everything tomorrow, and didn't take my phone, wasn't allowed to access the internet. When I got back for after 3 weeks, is my company still there? Are we still in business? And more importantly, are we thriving? So to me, that's the ultimate holy grail of being that business owner. And how you make that transition mentally and kind of know where you are. I think when you're starting to feel uncomfortable, starting to feel guilty, like I should be doing this task, I should be doing this thing, you're probably on the right track. in my experience, when I first started trying to make that transition, I started feeling a little guilty, like I should be doing these things, and it's because I was used to that mentality of implementing versus focusing on working on the business as a whole. So,
Yeah.
unfortunately, it's one of those things. When you feel uncomfortable, you're probably doing the right thing.
Well,
So it's
that's the important thing, right? Is that you're it anytime there's growth, it's usually when you're doing the uncomfortable. I mean,
Mhm.
unless I'm doing a Spartan race, which I did in September, that was just uncomfortable, the whole thing. Um, but does that type of transition vary among folks or business owners, or is it you just wake up one morning and aha, I've transitioned.
Yeah, no, I would like to say that it's you wake up one morning and you're done, type of thing. But like most things in life, it's a spectrum,
Mm-hmm.
so to speak. So, and it depends on where you are in that spectrum. It's if you have let's say, a larger, more mature business, you've got, I mean, it's a substantial company, 100 employees, let's say, so it's a substantial business. It's kind of like trying to turn an ocean liner's directions versus trying to turn the direction of a speedboat. So you can't expect that to happen overnight. It is going to take time, but if you're, a solopreneur, you're just you, or just have, one employer, a
Mm-hmm.
couple contractors or something, you'd obviously make that transition a lot quicker. But I
Right.
think, again, it comes back to when you realize that you're not big on the implementation, you're big on the what needs to be done, not am I doing it, kind of attitude. When you start to realize that you're focusing on those things and not on the daily grind, so to speak, I think
Uh,
that's when you mentally have made that leap. And it's not to say we all, that's why I say it's a spectrum. It's kind of like golf. You can never really win, so to speak. You
what?
can't
You
you
just
can't
blew
get to
my whole
100.
theory about golf.
That's
You can
right.
never win.
That that's my excuse for not hitting par anyway.
Oh well, I don't even. Yeah, okay. We won't get into that today.
But so you know, it, it's a theoretical thing because you can never 100% get there, so to speak.
Agreed.
You've always got to check in on things. It's just like an investment. It depends on how much you're involved, how much you want to be involved. But I guess it's about having the freedom to decide what level you want to be involved,
True.
which
True.
is, it always, I kind of laugh when I think about it, because here we are, most of us get into entrepreneurship, I would say just about everybody, because what do we want? We want freedom. We don't want to have a boss. We want to be
Mm.
able to make as much money as we can, all those things. And typically after a couple of years, you can sit somebody down and say, how's that working for you? And it's usually the other way around. You're working harder, longer hours, sometimes for the same pay, sometimes less. And so but making that transition allows you to get back that freedom, get those goals that you originally got into it in the first place.
Yeah, it's interesting. I have a client that made that transition. They had a cabin in northern Michigan that they wanted to spend, like you said, go to, I think it was Tahiti, for a few weeks, and they wanted to go spend 4 weeks there. And they tried, but the phone kept going off, right? And what ended up happening is helping them understand that your current team that you have around you is not going to help you get there. And that's another thing too, is that most business owners, when they start the company, if they have a team around them, depending on the type of company it is, as they grow and as they shift more of those responsibilities, it may not be the same team. But that is a very, very tough conversation to have with somebody who's they've been in the trenches, right?
Yes,
And
absolutely. And team, I think you're totally onto it, Dean. The building a team is one of the biggest things I focused on, because it's one of the biggest things that really moved the needle for me and allowed that transition. It's something that, we, as we talked about, there's so many great lessons that we bring out of the military. But
mhm.
one of the things that I brought, but didn't realize that was actually holding me back a little bit, the military is very top down. In other words, when we tell a subordinate, do something, they have to. It's an order. There's not really an option, unless you want to end up in the brig. And in the real world, though, people don't have to do what you tell them just
Right.
because, so to speak. I mean, yes, you're paying them, but they can quit and go somewhere else. They have some options. And so it's a different type of leadership in the sense that you've got to get buy-in from people
Mhm.
that to a greater extent than you do in a military context. And that transition took me a little bit because, but eventually I also realized how critical having that right team, like you're talking about, is.
Mhm.
And that's got to grow with you. Because we went again for years with, we had very high turnover at our company. It was my way or the highway. It's like, here's the orders, go implement, and not the best management, certainly in retrospect, um, but if you look at it in my mentality these days, your team, your employees, contractors, whoever you have with you, I believe that's your single most important asset as a business owner. If you look at it from a business valuation standpoint, from an outside firm, what's important to them if they were to buy your business, probably your customer list is probably what's
Mhm.
most valuable. But
Right.
as a business owner, if you put together the right team, you can get sued out of business, you can lose your biggest customer, you can have all these
Yeah.
catastrophic things that will happen. But if you've got the right team around you, those people that have bought in and believe in what you're doing, uh, you can start over and very quickly be back, where you were before and probably better. So, the emphasis on building that team, and of course, that's one of the most difficult parts, of owning a business, in my opinion.
It
Um,
is.
Building that team, and unfortunately, also getting rid of the ones that don't fit that team, and creating that
Yeah.
culture. But it's absolutely critical. I think you're totally right on that.
Yeah, and I mean, it's like in the military, we're given our team, right? We don't get to choose typically, and
Yeah.
so you've got to work with what you've been given. In the private sector, it's a lot different, and I think that's the team is really what in the culture is really what's going to drive the company forward, and I just think it's one of the things where I was speaking at a conference, and I heard the exact same thing you mentioned earlier about I can't find anybody to work. And I'm like, let's take a look at how you're doing it. What's the process you're using? Are you using to attract them in?
Mhm.
And it was interesting. I said, hey, this is what I would recommend you do. Make some changes here. From a process perspective, I would, eliminate this and add this. And it's interesting. We did the work right there in the workshop, and I heard from a few of them later on. I said, "Oh, it actually worked." I'm like, "Well, that's why I came and spoke." But so yeah, I mean, uh, it is a team is really it's the crux to the business, right? If you have one. And I just got a text message prior to our recording here. They've added some employees and they lost some through one retired and one wasn't working out, and now they're back to a full team again. And the owner is just so happy. I got a text of, "Hey, look at this. Everybody's logged into their shift and everything." And I was like, "Yep, it's great." But no, I love this conversation about the shift, owner to, operator to owner. But I want to shift into the new topic of cold calling, because that is one I've done cold calling, and I'm not going to say I love it. Uh, but it is something that you hear a lot of, depending on who you talk to, right? Cold calling's dead. No, cold calling still works. You just got to do it this way. And so I'd love to understand from you. You've got cold calling background. What And I've read that the fear of cold calling is like the fear of speaking in front of a crowd. Although I love speaking and I love actually being on podium and speaking, so it must be weird. But it sounds like tell us about cold calling. What is the current state? I mean, is it still one of the top ways for sales? I mean, what's the skinny on cold calling?
Yeah, absolutely. And just to give your audience a little context, Dean, I didn't mention it, but the company that I own and started 22 years ago, this current company, is primarily based around cold calling.
Got it.
And we
Okay.
do, it's B2B cold calling. So just to clarify that, we're not talking about the old days of, getting the call while you're at the dinner table, so to speak, trying to sell you vitamins or something. Yeah, that consumer-based cold calling is a goner, in my opinion. I mean, pretty much any call you get these days is a scam. So, what we're talking about is businesses calling other businesses.
Got it.
But the short answer is yes, it still does work and it works very effectively. But it's like everything. I think people tend to go from shiny object to shiny object, just in general. And marketing is no different. And we've been doing this, as I said, for 22 plus years, and I did prior to that. I've done hundreds of thousands of cold calls personally over my time, and it's one of those things that in the right scenario, the right situation, it works wonderfully. For instance, it tends to work better for things that are high ticket. If you're selling something that's $10,000, let's say, it's much more effective than if you're going to try to sell something that's $27. You're probably more likely to have more success selling it online, so to speak.
Oh, sure.
There's certain industries that tend to fit better. Like we do a lot of work in the mergers and acquisitions, business brokers. We do work with commercial insurance agents, things that are, again, professional B2B type of scenarios, where you're dealing with executives, managed IT, those types of things that, again, it's, if it's consumer based, it doesn't really work. But the way I look at marketing just in general, to give you a context, everybody that likes to think that, whatever we're teaching marketing wise, that's the holy grail, and you need to do this. So if we're a social media company that specializes in, Facebook ads or whatever, well, Facebook ads is for everybody and you should all do it. And whenever somebody tells you that, I would run the other way, because as one of my original business mentors said, everything works sometimes and nothing works all the time.
Works all the time. Yep.
So we've got to really, the reality is for most of our businesses, there's probably only a couple of marketing techniques that will actually work really effectively for what you're doing. So you're going to have to find out what those are. A lot of times the only way to do it is to test it. But so, running Facebook ads may be gangbusters for you. Cold calling may work for you, again, in the right, if it's higher ticket or whatever, that right situation.
Right.
Doing old fashioned mailers still works, for the right context. There's one of the reasons, as a side note, that cold calling works is because a lot of business owners, believe it or not, even in this day and age, are not big social media users. So they're not checking Facebook or LinkedIn all day long, and but they'll open up the mail, or they might answer the phone themselves, depending on the size of the company, and you get to them that way. So it's a long answer, but we've do millions of dollars a year, and we've had clients that have been with us. I think I was looking at a client the other day has been with us since 2003. So what is that? 20 years.
Wow. Congratulations.
But I mean, not that we're so great, but just the point is that it has worked in the past and it still works very well. So, is the long answer to your question.
No, and I whenever I get pitched Facebook ads, LinkedIn ads, I always push back pretty hard, because you're right. You need to understand your client, first of all, and you need to understand where do they live. A few years ago, pre-pandemic, I was giving a workshop on the lean canvas in starting up. And one of the things is identifying who your ideal client is and where do you find them. And I always gave the example of, my youngest son, if you're going to search for him on Facebook, good luck. If you're going to search for him, well, I don't know about TikTok nowadays, because TikTok wasn't there back then, but he's in Instagram and Twitter. He's a sports fanatic, and but he's very visual. He's not going to be, he's not going to be on Facebook. In fact, I don't even think he's ever had a Facebook account. But if you're going to market to him, you need to understand where he lives, right? And if you don't know that, it's not going to work for you. And so I absolutely agree with you. Testing and doing the work and just understanding, where they live is important, because I've had great conversations cold calling, and I've have I ever gotten a client from it? I'll admit no, but I've had some great conversations with them, and and given them some business tips. But it's no, you're right. It's really understanding about who's the best fit for it. And because when I first got into the business coaching advisory role, my mentor was like, "Oh, you just got to dial. You just got to get your phone out and dial." And I listened for a little bit, but it was more of, it's tough to build a relationship with somebody when you're just reaching out to them for the very first time. But it's one of the things where I did eventually enjoy doing it, but I haven't done it in many years.
Yeah, well, it's it's one of those things that it goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning, the concept of being an owner versus an operator, and the operator is making those cold calls themselves.
Yeah.
And there's nothing wrong with that, starting out, if that's an effective technique for you. But as soon as you can, that's something you want to outsource.
Right.
That's how we stumbled into the business initially, is because we were, believe it or not, this was like 1999. We were selling websites, my business partner and I, and that was our thing. And we couldn't afford advertising at the time because we were just starting out. So cold calling is the only thing we could do. So, but eventually I realized I couldn't go on the appointments and close the sales if I'm calling all day. So we hired a gal to do that for us. And, many years later, here we are. But so the point is, as quickly as you can, you want to find somebody else to help you with that.
Right.
Not that you can't do it, but it's a matter of should you do it, like a lot of things in our business.
Very true. I shouldn't do my own accounting, that's for sure.
You and me both.
Yeah. So how, you've obviously got, folks on the phone, but, one of the key things is getting rejected. I mean, nobody likes getting rejected, but how do you help them overcome that? Because I didn't like getting rejected, which is one of the reasons I got turned off from doing it.
Yeah.
And again, I found other more successful ways than calling, but it it's evolved over the years, I'm sure. But how do you help folks not, just let it roll off their back?
Yeah, and you're right. There are very few people in this world that rejection is something they enjoy. So
Well, if you do, then I think
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I'm not sure we want them, on the phone anyway. But so it's a total natural thing. So it is like a lot of things in life that it's a combination of things. So we have to, of course, discipline. It does take effort,
Sure.
but there's little tricks that you can do to help yourself make it easier and less painful.
Okay.
One of the things, and I don't do as much cold calling these days, but in the old days, one of the things I used to do was I listened to a real estate trainer once who was real big into it. And he said, when you come into the office in the morning, don't check your voicemail, don't check your email. They didn't have social media at the time, but don't check your social media. Don't look at the news. Don't do any of that. Do your cold calls first. And the reason is because you don't want your mind cluttered with anything possible negative. And it's because you're going to get sucked dry a little bit because there's going to be some negativity. So you can't afford to have anything else already in there before you start. And it's a high energy activity. It's one of those things that I highly recommend, if you're doing it yourself again, that, you have a stand-up desk, because we all tend to do better when we're standing. Oh, there you go. Yes, I've had a standing desk for years, and only the last few months I had to kind of sit down because I got a bad back. But one of that gives you energy, and it comes across the phone, and it makes life easier for you, because when you get a better reaction, that's when it makes it easier for you. And sometimes, it really is. You do have to force yourself to get through those first few calls to start getting into a rhythm.
Hmm.
But then you find, like you said, you find people that, oh, hey, this person's actually nice, and they're pleasant to talk to and everything. And you use that as fuel to go to the next call. And a lot of people, what do we do when let's say we're trying to set appointments, and so we're dialing away and get rejected, and then finally somebody agrees to an appointment. We think, hey, great, score, it's my day, and so happy and excited. And then I'm going to go celebrate. So I'm going to go to lunch, or I'm going to go, do whatever. The
Yeah.
problem is you lose the momentum. So as soon as you have a positive outcome on the phone, you want to use that to spur yourself further and keep going. Um, and then, I would say one of the other things that this sounds funny, but it does go back to mindset. One of the things that really helped me over the years is, if we believe in what we're offering people, that we
Hmm.
actually think, hey, this is actually going to help somebody, this is going to make their life better. There are people on the other end of that list, so to speak, that desperately want and need what you're offering.
Right.
And if we don't wade through the other people and some of the negativity, well, let's face it, we're kind of screwing those people over. I hate to say it that way, but those people that are waiting for us, we're leaving them hanging.
Yeah.
So it's our job to be courageous enough to get through and wade through the other stuff to get to those people who actually need our help and who are going to be glad we called.
Yeah.
And if we kind of remind ourselves of that, when that person hangs up on us, or gives us the verbal finger, so to speak, uh, then that if we
I've heard
focus
that come
on
through the phone, by the way. So,
that, there you go. Well, these days with Zoom, I guess, I don't know. I don't think I've ever heard of, Zoom cold calls, but I'm sure that's coming. Uh,
oh no, it was a cold call via the standard telephone line, but it was the finger and verbal. I'll just leave it at that.
well, you call enough people, you're going to find some strange things. It's just like anything in life. You
True.
can't make this stuff up. I've had people tell me they're going to come down and kill me, and and all kinds of crazy stuff. But it's just that's that's the society we live in, and some
Yeah.
strange ducks out there. But so you have to laugh it off sometimes. But again, I think that particular thing really helped me, and I would literally write it out, somewhere, a phrase or
Hmm.
something that would make me think about it, and post it in front of me,
Yep.
so that I can remember, oh yeah, that person needs me, is waiting there. If I mean, I can't just leave them hanging. I mean,
Right.
I've got a duty to get to them,
Yep.
and help them out. So that's one of the biggest things that really helped me. But it's a skill like anything else.
Yep. Agreed.
Some people say, well, they're a born salesperson or whatever, and I don't believe that. I mean, there's certain
Yeah.
personalities that, there's obviously more people oriented, personalities and all that, but really it's about skills, and it's something that
Hmm.
can be learned. So when you first start out, you're going to suck, and you're supposed to, so that's okay. But if you keep doing it, you won't after a while,
Yeah.
and it'll get easier. So, um, I would like to tell you that it's easy and you can be overnight success, but hey, we all know life doesn't work that way. So
Not typically, but I think you're right. Because I actually, so I had a colleague that we would, go back and forth with. Like we had, because I had scripts I would use, and, they would object. And so it actually became fun because you never knew what objection they were going to throw.
yeah,
And I almost deemed it like sport. But one of the ways I used um, my mind to get through it is, so having been in the military, having been deployed, having been in law enforcement, I'm like, at the end of the day, if this cold call is the only stress I'm going to feel, I'm pretty sure I can get it done. And eventually, before I stopped doing it, I was enjoying it. I'd love dialing in, logging in and kicking the dialer and just hitting start and just letting it roll. But yeah, I mean, I viewed it as sport. I viewed it
yeah,
as, hey, there's somebody out there that needs help. I talked to a gentleman who had just closed his machine shop. It was post COVID. It was post COVID, and he had just closed it. In fact, he was in Phoenix. Now that I think about it, And he orders had dried up. I mean, and he's like, you know what, I'm done, I've had enough, I'm selling. He sold all the equipment and everything, and he did pretty good on the sale. But he goes, I think I talked to him for like 2 hours, and he actually gave me business tips. And I was like, hey, you know, so it was a great call. I actually chalked that up to one of the best cold calls I've ever had. And but well, hey, this has been great. I've got a really, really tough question for you though, and I'm hoping it's all right. But I always like to ask, what 3 books you'd recommend to my audience and why?
Mm. Let's see. I'm going to give you first my favorite one, and this is something we give to all of our clients. It's a book called "The Road Less Stupid," and I love the title. It's by a guy named Keith Cunningham, and it's a business book, business oriented, kind of one of those books that's got a lot of self-contained chapters, so you can kind of jump around, but just some real wisdom in there. So I always recommend that one. I'm and I got to throw it in there. I'll feel guilty. I'm a Christian, so of course the Bible, you got to have that one on there.
Right back here.
There you go. That's probably number one on the list. But and then I would say there's 2 other classics that I'll throw in there. And I'm sure a lot of your audience has heard of them. But the E-Myth by Michael Gerber, which is all about that whole concept of operator to owner. I read that probably when I was just got out of the military, so I was probably 25, and I think that really fundamentally affected my entire business career as a business owner, and in a positive way. And then the old classic Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends and Influence People. I mean, what was that, written in like the 20s or something? I think and
I think it was about the same time as Think and Grow Rich, which is
yeah,
back in the 20s.
and yet. Yeah. Again, that was one of those books that really changed my life as a young man, especially making that transition from the military where, let's face it, people skills and getting somebody to like you, it was not a high priority.
Didn't have to be.
Yeah, so I would say those 3 are probably my favorite ones, and the ones that if you haven't read, or if it's been a while since you've read one of those, I would highly recommend them.
Yeah, it's interesting because my first corporate gig, I don't know if you recall, a computer manufacturer called Gateway, but so I was with them for a number of years, and I was the engineer that set up their internet service provider, helped them build that out, and ultimately then took on I was in the engineering lab taking on the escalations for folks that had some issues, significant technical issues, and got promoted into management because I did so well doing that. And the military way of leadership just doesn't work in the corporate environment.
That's a nice way to say it. Yeah.
The Dale Carnegie book, I wholeheartedly agree with you on that one, because I mean it How to Win Friends and Influence People. I mean you don't have to do that in the military.
No.
I mean, you do when you reach, like, my son is currently a major in the infantry in the Army, and he now has to start to influence people because it gets kind of political at that level. And so it's interesting. I love that book. I think I've read it multiple times, and I think it's probably going to get back on my list for 2024 because it is an impactful book. And the Bible's another one. Proverbs.
There's so many biblical or lessons in the Bible that we don't think of the Bible. A lot of people think of it as a religious book, and but whether you take it for what it is and believe it's God's word like I do, or you just think it's great reading, a lot of wisdom in there.
There's the leadership lessons that come out of there are just you just, it's amazing. So where can my audience go to learn more about you? And we'll definitely add that to the show notes, but I'd love to be able to send folks to your website, or I think if you've got a number they can reach out to you at, I'd love to have them have a chat with you.
Yeah, absolutely. First, I'm on the major social media platforms, usually under the Robert Poole, kind of like a swimming pool with an E on the end. and like YouTube channel's got a lot of videos and everything related to business topics. And then, I was going to tell you, Dean, that I'd be happy to offer any of your audiences, free 30-minute consultation on,
Okay.
that topic of making that transition from operator to owner, and kind of get an idea of where you are in that spectrum right now, and give you some actual ideas that you can start implementing, in the next 90 days, that you can actually make an impact and get a little bit of your freedom back. So you can email me. I can put it in the show notes if you don't mind. Just Robert at operator to owner.net. And or you can give our office a call. They can get through to me, 866-231-6776. I'd be more than happy to talk to anybody from your audience, because I know what it's like to have that frustration, and I certainly would love to speak with anybody about it and see if I can help out.
Absolutely. So we'll definitely include all of that in the show notes. And it's been I absolutely enjoyed having you on. And as I love to do, is I love to give my guests the final word. So I will I'll turn it over to you.
Well, yeah, thank you again for the opportunity, Dean. And I would just say to our military brethren out there that, if you're thinking about getting into entrepreneurship, or you're in it already, just keep at it, because remember, it is a game, and the only way you lose is by quitting.
I'm not even going to respond to that, because that's the best closing I've had in a long time. So
Okay.
Robert, it's been great. I greatly appreciate having you on. It's great to get to know you, and I'm looking forward to this episode coming out.
Perfect. Thank you.